Today, already the last chapters of paper 93 from the Urantia Book, the third book, which is all about the history of Urantia, and paper 93 was all about Machiaventa Melchizedek, who has been named 3 times in the Bible and who didn't got that much of attention in the Bible, and so we hardly came to know who this Melchizedek in actuality has been. But the last days, through the Urantia Book, you have been given a more in-depth background about this Melchizedek person, whose name is in actuality Machiaventa Melchizedek. All right, today the last chapters will be departure of Melchizedek, as well as the present status of Machiaventa Melchizedek, and the in-between chapter is what happened in actuality after Melchizedek left the earthly house. All right, let us start. And here you go. Now you can read along with me. And I want to say to you, please set aside all your ideas and everything that has been taught to you. Set it all aside and embrace this information with an open mind. And the Urantia Book presents us a type of information that in actuality you can see as, if you would place the Bible next to it, that what the Bible lacks, you can find in the Urantia Book. So see it as such. It's not a replacement or whatever. It is unfortunate that the Bible lacks so many in-depth information, especially about some key figures and of course about Jesus himself. All right, let's start. Departure of Melchizedek. It was shortly after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah that Machiaventa decided to end his emergency bestowal on Urantia. Melchizedek's decision to terminate his sojourn in the flesh was influenced by numerous conditions, chief of which was the growing tendency of the surrounding tribes, and even of his immediate associates, to regard him as a demigod, to look upon him as a supernatural being, which indeed he was. But they were beginning to reverence him unduly and with a highly superstitious fear. In addition to these reasons, Melchizedek wanted to leave the scene of his earthly activities a sufficient length of time before Abraham's death to ensure that the truth of the one and only God would become strongly established in the minds of his followers. Accordingly, Machiaventa retired one night to his tent at Salem. Having said good night to his human companions, and when they went to call him in the morning, he was not there, for his fellows had taken him. As silently he came, as silently he departed. And that's also the reason why we have no images of the original Machiaventa Melchizedek, because I truly believe just like Jesus, that he also knew that eventually humans would place him on a pedestal and would eventually start to worship him. So I truly believe that this is also uh, one of the reasons why we do not have any image of this Machiaventa Melchizedek, and that he uh, probably also has said to the people around him to not um, to not make images or whatsoever in whatsoever way a picture of him. Point 9. After Melchizedek's departure, it was a great trial for Abraham when Melchizedek so suddenly disappeared. Although he had fully warned his followers that he must sometime go as he had come, they were not reconciled to the loss of their wonderful leader. The great organization built up at Salem nearly disappeared, though the traditions of these days were what Moses built upon when he led the Hebrew slaves out of Egypt. The loss of Melchizedek produced a sadness in the heart of Abraham that he never fully overcame. Hebron he had abandoned it when he gave up the ambition of building a material kingdom. And now, upon the loss of his associate in the building of the spiritual kingdom, he departed from Salem, going south to live near his interests at Gerar. Abraham became fearful and timid. Immediately after the disappearance of Melchizedek, he withheld his identity upon arrival at Gerar, so that Abimelech appropriated his wife shortly after his marriage to Sarah. Abraham one night had overheard a plot to murder him in order to get his brilliant wife. This dread became a terror to the otherwise brave and daring leader. All his life he feared that someone would kill him secretly in order to get Sarah. And this explains why on 3 separate occasions this brave man exhibited real cowardice. But Abraham was not long to be deterred in his mission as the successor of Melchizedek. Soon he made converts among the Philistines and of Abimelech's people, made a treaty with them, and in turn became contaminated with many of their superstitions, particularly with their practice of sacrificing firstborn sons. So here comes the actual explanation of the sacrificing of the firstborn son. And it's not all what we thought, what the Bible is explaining as life story, life history about Abraham. So it's good that we now have this in-depth information coming from the Urantia Book, which is the 5th epochal revelation given to us. Thus did Abraham again become a great leader in Palestine. He was held in reverence by all groups and honored by all kings. He was the spiritual leader of all the surrounding tribes, and his influence continued for some time after his death. During the closing years of his life, he once more returned to Hebron, the scene of his earlier activities and the place where he had worked in association with Melchizedek. Abraham's last act was to send trusty servants to the city of his brother. Nahor, on the border of Mesopotamia, to secure a woman of his own people as a wife for his son Isaac. It had long been the custom of Abraham's people to marry their cousins, and Abraham died confident in that faith in God which he had learned from Melchizedek in the vanished schools of Salem. So after Melchizedek departure, all that he had builded was soon gone. It was hard for the next generation to comprehend the story of Melchizedek. Within 500 years, many regarded the whole narrative as a myth. So now we get to understand how myths are being created. And also, we learn here a lesson: if we do not write things down, then, yeah, a very important information eventually gets lost. Isaac held fairly well to the teaching of his father and nourished the gospel of the Salem colony. But it was harder for Jacob to grasp the significance of these traditions. Joseph was a firm believer in Melchizedek and was largely because of this regarded by his brothers as a dreamer. So now we get also a deeper understanding about um, the situation that happened between Joseph and his brothers. Not everything that is being stated in the Bible contains pieces of the real information of the situation in that time and age. So again, we now get a more in-depth clarification about all these key figures in the Old Testament. Joseph's honor in Egypt was chiefly due to the memory of his great-grandfather Abraham. Joseph was offered military command of the Egyptian armies, but being such a firm believer in the traditions of Melchizedek and the later teachings of Abraham and Isaac, he elected to serve as a civil administrator, believing that he could thus better labor for the advancement of the kingdom of heaven. The teaching of Melchizedek was full and replete, but the records of these days seemed impossible and fantastic to the later Hebrew priests. So here we get the answer why also many of these teachings from Melchizedek also have been wiped away and wiped out. So the Hebrew priests found these teachings impossible and fantastic, a bit too fantastic. Although many had some understanding of these transactions, at least up to the times of the en masse editing of the Old Testament. And please see here a very important sentence. So again, although many had some understanding of these transactions, at least up to the times of the en masse editing of the Old Testament records in Babylon. So here we see how the Old Testament was already in the editing. And this has never changed until the day of today. the whole Bible book is completely edited. So that's why we need to question if it is truly God's word, because if it truly was God's word, and this is really my idea and how I see it, if it truly was God's word, then how can it be possible that such a book from the beginning has been edited so many times, uncountable times? And every time, if a new generation arrived on the doormat, um, the whole Bible is being edited again. So why is this going on? Why is it that especially people, uh, like scribes and scholars and whatever you have, are doing this? If it truly was God's word, then you would not do this. Then not a hair on your head would do such an respectless thing. And another thing I find amazing is, why is the English version of the Bible called King James? Why is it that people are not questioning these things and start asking themselves this question? Why is it called Bible? Why is it called King James Bible? Why is it called after a human king that was not even a nice personality either? The name Bible comes from a place, Biblios. Well, this place was tremendously involved in temple prostitution. So I don't know, but for me, these are still questions of which I have something like, why is it that my fellow brothers and sisters are not daring to question all these things? And why is it that this book has been edited uncountable times so that we get lesser and lesser and lesser information from it? All right, I continue. What the Old Testament records describe as conversations between Abraham and God were in reality conferences between Abraham and Melchizedek. Later tribes regarded the term Melchizedek as synonymous with God. The record of so many contacts of Abraham and Sarah with the, between quotation marks, the angel of the Lord, refers to their numerous visits with Melchizedek. The Hebrew narratives of Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph are far more reliable than those about Abraham. And that's indeed so, because the way the Bible depicts Abraham is very meager, and is a way that we get a complete wrong idea of how this person was. The Bible describes Abraham as a poor fellow, and oh, he was so lucky that when he got 99 years old, became father of one son. But if we now go through the background history presented to us from the Urantia Book, then we get a whole different image of who Abraham in actuality was. Although they also contain many diversions. So this sentence, refers to the storylines of Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. They are a bit more reliable, although these storylines also contain many diversions from the facts, alterations made intentionally and unintentionally at the time of the compilation of these records by the Hebrew priests during the Babylonian captivity. Keturah was not a wife of Abraham like Hagar. She was merely a concubine. All of Abraham's property went to Isaac, the son of Sarah, the status wife. Abraham was not so old as the records indicate, and his wife was much younger. These ages were deliberately altered in order to provide for the subsequent alleged miraculous birth of Isaac. And humans are addicted to miracles. The national ego of the Jews was tremendously depressed by the Babylonian captivity. In their reaction against national inferiority, they swung to the other extreme of national and racial egotism, in which they distorted and perverted their traditions with the view of exalting themselves above all races as the so-called chosen people of God. So here it comes, the Hebrews themselves have, or the Jews themselves have, in actuality themselves declared as chosen people, but we all know that our Father in heaven is not a respecter of people. So for him, everyone is just a child of his, and he doesn't have favorites. He's not doing favoritism in whatever kind. And this sentence also is in actuality the one that later on the Sanhedrin people, so the Sadducees, Pharisees, and so on, created this man created image of the Messiah. And so they, the Jewish leaders, the scribes and the priests, they made their own idea of the Messiah, and they created this picture that the Messiah should be a warrior type like person that would eventually move all the Romans and heathens out of Israel, and then place all the Jewish people as people above all peoples and Israel above all nations. Well, Jesus knew that this idea was absolutely not in alignment with the will of God. So that is why Jesus and the Sanhedrin, Pharisees, Sadducees, Jewish leaders and scribes and priests were always in this discussion, and they in actuality disliked Jesus because he didn't expect their image of the Messiah. I continue, and hence they carefully edited all their records for the purpose of raising Abraham and their national leaders high up above all other persons. So this is also very important. Not excepting Melchizedek himself. The Hebrew scribes therefore destroyed, the Hebrew scribes therefore destroyed every record of these momentous times which they could find, preserving only the narrative of the meeting of Abraham and Melchizedek after the battle of Siddim, which they deemed reflected great honor upon Abraham. So now we get a far more in-depth understanding of history here. And thus, in losing sight of Melchizedek, they also lost sight of the teaching of this emergency son regarding the spiritual mission of the promised bestowal son. Lost sight of the nature of this mission so fully and completely that very few of their progeny were able or willing to recognize and receive Michael when he appeared on earth and in the flesh, as Melchizedek had foretold. But one of the writers of the book of Hebrews understood the mission of Melchizedek, for it is written, "This Melchizedek, priest of the Most High, was also king of peace, without father, without mother, without pedigree, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like a son of God. He abides a priest continually." This writer designated Melchizedek as a type of the later bestowal of Michael, affirming that Jesus was a minister forever on the order of Melchizedek. Michael has and knows what it is to be a Melchizedek because he lived for a while in the world called Melchizedek and he was amongst them. But that was part of his bestowal career. While this comparison was not altogether fortunate, it was literally true that Christ did receive provisional title to Urantia upon the orders of the 12 Melchizedek receivers on duty at the time of his world bestowal. And then as the last chapter of this paper 93, present status of Melchizedek Melchizedek. During the years of Melchizedek's incarnation, the Urantia Melchizedek receivers functioned as 11. When Melchizedek considered that his mission as an emergency son was finished, he signalized this fact to his 11 associates, and they immediately made ready the technique whereby he was to be released from the flesh and safely restored to his original Melchizedek status. And on the third day after his disappearance from Salem, he appeared among his 11 fellows of the Urantia assignment and resumed his interrupted career as one of the planetary receivers of planet 606 of Satania. Melchizedek terminated his bestowal as a creature of flesh and blood just as suddenly and unceremoniously as he had begun it. Neither his appearance nor departure were accompanied by any unusual announcement or demonstration, neither resurrection roll call nor ending of planetary dispensation marked his appearance on Urantia. His was an emergency bestowal, but Melchizedek did not end his sojourn in the flesh of human beings until he had been duly released by the Father Melchizedek and had been informed that his emergency bestowal had received the approval of the chief executive of Nebadon, who is Gabriel of Salfington. Macchiventa Melchizedek continued to take a great interest in the affairs of the descendants of those men who had believed in his teachings when he was in the flesh, but the progeny of Abraham through Isaac, as intermarried with the Kenites, were the only line which long continued to nourish any clear concept of the Salem teachings. This same Melchizedek continued to collaborate throughout the 19 succeeding centuries with the many prophets and seers. So he was in contact with all these later on prophets and seers, such as Isaiah, Jeremiah, um, Micah, and so on. Thus endeavoring to keep alive the truths of Salem until the fullness of the time for Michael's appearance on earth. Macchiventa continued as a planetary receiver up to the times of the triumph of Michael on Urantia. Subsequently, he was attached to the Urantia service on Jerusalem as one of the 24 directors, only just recently having been elevated to the position of personal ambassador on Jerusalem of the Creator Son, bearing the title Vicegerent Planetary Prince of Urantia. It is our belief that as long as Urantia remains an inhabited planet, Macchiventa Melchizedek will not be fully returned to the duties of his order of sonship, but will remain, speaking in the terms of time, forever a planetary minister representing Christ Michael. As his was an emergency bestowal on Urantia, it does not appear from the records what Macchiventa's future may be. It may develop that the Melchizedek Corps of Nebadon have sustained the permanent loss of one of their number. Recent rulings handed down from the Most Highs of Edentia and later confirmed by the ancients of days of Uversa strongly suggest that this bestowal, Melchizedek, is destined to take the place of the fallen planetary prince Caligastia. If our conjectures in this respect are correct, it is altogether possible that Macchiventa Melchizedek may again appear in person on Urantia, and in some modified manner resume the role of the dethroned planetary prince, or else appear on Earth to function as vicegerent planetary prince representing Christ Michael, who now actually holds the title of planetary prince of Urantia. So that is Jesus. While it is far from clear to us as to what Macchiventa's destiny may be, nevertheless, events which have so recently taken place strongly suggests that the foregoing conjectures are probably not far from the truth. We well understand how by his triumph on Urantia, Michael became the successor of both Caligastia and Adam, how he became the planetary prince of peace and the second Adam. And now we behold the conferring upon this Melchizedek of the title vicegerent, planetary prince of Urantia. Will he also be constituted vicegerent, material son of Urantia? Or is there a possibility that an unexpected and unprecedented event is to take place, the sometime return to the planet of Adam and Eve, or certain of their progeny as representatives of Michael, with the titles vicegerents of the second Adam of Urantia. And all these speculations associated with the certainty of the future appearances of both magisterial and Trinity teachers' sons, in conjunction with the explicit promise of the Creator's Son to return sometime, make Urantia a planet of future uncertainty and render it one of the most interesting and intriguing spheres in all the universe of Nebadon. It is altogether possible that in some future age, when Urantia is approaching the era of light and life, after the affairs of the Lucifer Rebellion and the Caligastia succession have been finally educated, we may witness the presence on Urantia simultaneously of Makiventa, Adam, Eve, and Christ Michael, as well as either a magisterial son or even Trinity teacher sons. So this could be possible. It has long been the opinion of our order that Makiventa's presence on the Jerusalem core of Urantia directors, the 24 counselors, is sufficient evidence to warrant the belief that he is destined to follow the mortals of Urantia on through the universe scheme of progression and ascension, even to the paradise core of the finality. We know that Adam and Eve are thus destined to accompany their earth fellows on the paradise adventure when Urantia has become settled in light and life. Less than 1,000 years ago, this same Makiventa Melchizedek, the one-time sage of Salem, was invisibly present on Urantia for a period of 100 years, acting as a resident governor general of the planet. And if the present system of directing planetary affairs should continue, he will be due to return in the same capacity in a little over 1,000 years. This is the story of Makiventa Melchizedek, one of the most unique of all characters ever to become connected with the history of Urantia, and a personality who may be destined to play an important role in the future experience of your irregular and unusual world. All the information in this paper 93 is presented and given to us by a Melchizedek of Nebadon. And with this said, I have come to the end of reading these last chapters of this paper 93 from the third book of the Urantia book, that is all about the history of Urantia. All right, let us close off. And as last, I'm going to say thank you so much for listening and reading along with me. And God bless you. And have a nice and beautiful, joyful day. And if you get the urge or impulses to help a fellow brother or sister, please do so, because there are many brothers, sisters in dire need of help and a listening ear. Let us close off with a beautiful piece of music coming from Ben Sound.